Hey there, guys. Let's just take another example and kind of walk our way through what an array is, why we use it, and how it might benefit you. For this example, I will switch to a food example because those are what I'm good at. We can think of a carton of eggs as an array, right? Because an array is a single data type that holds multiple variables, and all of those variables are of the same type, and all of those variables are, roughly speaking, of the same thing, right? So an egg carton has one carton that represents the array, right? And that array would be an array of eggs. Each one of the eggs in that carton is, one of the individual variables that belongs to the array, but also it is homogeneous, right? We wouldn't expect to see like chicken egg, chicken egg, chicken egg, chicken egg, chicken egg, buffalo egg in here. That's not what we would expect to see. They would all be hopefully of the same kind. So we have one array, and that would be the carton. And we have individual elements of the array, and those would be each one of these individual eggs that we have there. One note here on what it is that we're required to remember when we are working with arrays is the following. Remember that an array starts with element number 0. You don't count this way. Your unknown potential future clients won't count this way. The next developer in the chain will count this way because that's the way we populate arrays. So if this particular carton was the array we're referring to, which it is, we would start at egg number 0. We would go to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. Makes perfect sense, right? I have a dozen eggs. We start with 0. We go to 11. So that means my 12th egg is number 11. Your users are going to hate having to do that. And in the example we're going to talk about here next, we're going to fix that issue when it comes to dealing with the user and dealing with the code. So I'm going to leave this here. This carton of eggs is one array. Each one of these eggs is a different element in the array, and that's kind of the nomenclature we're going to go and work with here. So for this piece of code, we're going to want to do the following. We're going to want to enter names into the array for each of the eggs in a carton. So am I naming eggs? Yes. It's weird, but let's just go with it. So again, the carton is your array. We're going to need a loop to be able to do this, right? Because I'm going to have to enter in name, 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 and I'm going to have to do that 12 times. The best way to do this is to have a loop for that. So when we are working with arrays, there's always two things to remember. Number one is you may not have to fill the array all the way up, right? So if I make breakfast, I'm going to be taking eggs out of my array. So that means I'm going to put a partially filled array back into my refrigerator, and that's fine. The other thing to have to know is it's even worse to go beyond the limits of our array. What happens if I have a 12 element array just like this, and I want to start putting in more? I've got a 13, a 14, a 15, 12 already fell on the floor. Don't worry about it. 16, 17, 18. These eggs over here stay on my countertop and are totally unaccounted for here inside the array. So that means they are gone forever. And that's certainly something we don't want to have to do. So let's be aware that when we are building the logic for our arrays, that we need to give ourselves, number one, a way to get out of the array early so that we have empty data elements in there, and that's okay. And number two is to make sure that we don't keep traversing past the end of our array, because those numbers are unaccounted for, unrecoverable. They essentially fall off into the void and are gone forever. So I can remove this typing as I go part because that was just a test. So just in case there are fewer eggs in the carton, we need a way to exit out of our loop. So first and foremost, we're going to have a name for our program. We'll be super creative and call it egg names program. We're going to need an end for that. I think everybody's going to be fine with that. In the way of data that we're going to need an array. Remember, good naming convention lets the next developer in the chain know just what it was that you were doing. So let's call it names_array, and that lets us know that names is an array. Pretty clever, right? Here, inside of the parentheses is the number of elements in that array, and this is 12. So next, we're going to need something to help us traverse, to go from element 0 to 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, ... 10 and 11. So we're going to need a counter to be able to do that, because a counter is going to count for us, right? We should start that counter at 0 because in array operations we start at 0. We are going to need a loop, right? I suggest that a do while is a little bit more flexible than a for loop. A do while, we can say do while counter is less than 12, right? Because it starts at 0, it runs to 11, and on the 12th iteration, or really it's the 13th iteration, we can break out of this counter, and that works pretty well. So this is helping us account for the second of those two conditions we need to be aware of, right? This is helping us account for stopping entering data when we reach the end of the array. Now, we also need to be aware that maybe, just maybe, the user isn't going to want to enter more data into the array. So we're going to need something else to check for here. And let's also have names. Names can be the thing that the user is entering that we can use to check for things. So, and also names does not equal, how about lowercase done. This way, when the user says, I'm done entering data, you can be done entering data. So if we have a do while, we're going to need an end do. And remember, we're going to need to indent everything here inside of our do while loop. So first and foremost, we are going to have to interact with the user, right? We're going to say display, and we're going to enter in a name for egg counter, because that's our counter, like so. So what we would expect here to see is exactly what it suggests. The terminal or the screen or the program or whatever you're thinking about is going to say enter in a name for egg counter. Counter is set at 0 though. So is your user going to be comfortable with entering in the 0th element? No, but this is pretty easy to help manage. Counter plus 1. This way it's going to display 1 for the first egg, even though the first egg's element number is 0. So just like we can see over here, element 0 is really and truly the element number of the first egg, but the user doesn't care about that. If instead we say 0 plus 1, that means that is going to display as 1. If we say 1 plus 1, that's going to display as 2. 2 plus 1, that's going to display as 3. And if we just add that little piece of code, our user is going to be much more comfortable being able to enter in the data as they go along. So, as with all displays, or as with all user interactions, I'm going to need to get something, and I'm going to have to get names, right? So in comes a name there. Now, we're going to need to account for the fact that I need a way to exit, right? So I'm going to have an if statement in here. And if names equals done, right, because that's going to be the signal to our code that, hey, look, I'm done entering names. If names equals done, we want to break out of here. So break is what we do for that. And then end do gets us out of our, or end if rather, end if gets us out of our selection statement here. So this way, if I position my if statement here, I can exit out of entering in names before I even get started. So that means I'm not accidentally writing data in that I didn't expect to be entering. If I put this block of code at the very end of my do while loop, that means that whatever the user enters, even if it's done, whatever the user enters is going to be stored into our array, and we don't necessarily want that. So we can continue on here. We can continue on here. So I've gotten their names, so now I have to do something with that name. Well, I have an array, names array. So names underscore array at, and now remember, the element of the array is the thing that we want to load in here, right? Because I've got a whole carton full of these. That's the array. Each one of those eggs is an element. So if I go with names array at counter, remember counter here is equal to 0. The first egg you can see over here, the first egg is also 0. So that means that I can enter in the data here equals names. So names, whatever I put in there, gets stored over in names array at element 0. And that's it. The next thing I have to do, or the last thing I have to do in here, is counter plus plus, because otherwise I'm going to be stuck in here forever, and I'm never going to refer to any other element in the array but the first one, which is again element number 0. So let's see how this looks. I'm going to take all of this code, just the good bits, and I'm going to paste it into here where it says this is where the code goes, because otherwise it wouldn't have saved that space for me. Now here is where we will actually worry about what the input is, and we'll see how those things are stored. So what happens here is as follows. When we run the program, let's run the program. So it's going to display, enter a name for an egg at whatever, counter plus 1. So the first time we go through, remember, this counter is equal to 0, but because I have counter plus 1, the user sees the number 1. That's fantastic. So the first time through, I'm going to put in Egbert, right? So now I get a name Egbert. So what happens is this test happens next. I didn't enter in done, so this if statement is entirely avoided, and next we come to this statement. Names underscore array at counter. So remember, this first time through we're at 0 equals names. So 0 gets Egbert. I'll admit to you, I probably could have typed that. It would have been faster. So after that comes counter plus plus. So that means we're going to increment the counter, and we're going to come back through our do while loop. So we get bounced back up to here, but this time our counter is 1. So I'm going to enter another name in here. And we're going to end up with Eggzilla. So Eggzilla comes through here this time around. And when the user sees the output, it's enter in a name for egg, counter plus 1. My counter is 1, but because of counter plus 1, they're going to see 2. Everything so far is perfect. The user thinks that they're entering in the second element, which they are, but technically speaking, it's going here into array element number 1 because arrays are always number minus 1. So this time I'm just going to say EZ for Eggzilla is the name that I have in there. I did not enter in done, so this entire if statement block is avoided. Here, names array at counter. So remember, the counter this time is 1, which is exactly where we want it to be, equals names, Eggzilla, and then after that, counter plus plus. So we would add 1 to the counter, so that means this time it's 2 for the next iteration through our array, which is perfect. So enter a name for the egg at 3 is what the user would see. We're going to get a name. This time we'll just call him Eggy. Eggy. So Eggy gets entered in there. This if statement is not entered into because the name entered was not done. So Eggy gets entered into here. It's element number 2, but it's really the third element in the array because it's 0, 1, 2. So we enter in the names into the array. We add 1 to our counter. And the next time we loop through here, our counter is going to be at 3. So this time, let's put in done. Remember, it's all lowercase and it's not with 2 O's, so or 0 O's. There we go. This time around, I'm going to enter in the name for egg number 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And so the user is being guided correctly, but also we're putting the data in here correctly because this is really counter at 3, which is our 4th iteration through because we have to start with 0. This time I enter in done. So right here it breaks out of my array. So this way I don't have to enter done into here because that's not the name I want. Because I put that conditional check, the if statement, up here instead of down here in my code, that means I'm not putting bad data into my system to begin with. So far so good. Take a look. Let's go back over it. And next we're going to actually get the inputted data out of the array.